everyone. So I'm Mandy Solk, and I've got the pleasure, enormous pleasure again, of interviewing Brian Longhurst and his lovely wife, THERESA Longhurst. And we've done some interviews before, which I'll go through in a minute. Brian is the author of some amazing books. The first one is Seek Ye First the Kingdom. The second is Finding the Kingdom Within. Then Entering the Kingdom Within. And then the fourth one is Living from the Kingdom Within. The fifth is Sharing the Kingdom Within. And the sixth is Extending the Kingdom Within. And the seventh book will be hopefully coming out in around Easter 2021. So that's really exciting, and that's great. So well done you for writing all those. And we've done, Brian and I and THERESA, we've done 3 interviews. So the first interview was with Brian, and that interview you can find, they're all on YouTube, and it was called He is Real, many exclamation marks, Jesus is Alive and Real Now. And that title was given to me by Brian's amazing spiritual teacher, who's passed over now to the other side, Olga Parks, and she's very much with us, as I'll explain in a minute. And the second interview was The Key to Fulfilling Relationships, and that's a lovely interview, really lovely. I think the title would have been better if I'd have asked Olga first, because I liked her first interview. Anyway, the third interview, that's today's, I asked Olga for the title finally, because this one is on forgiveness. So first of all, I got the title Forgiveness, and I'm going to say them all because they're all true, you see. So forgiveness, the hallmark of inner freedom. Very true. The second one was true forgiveness and how to do it when you don't know how. But then I thought, well, I needed to say something about the non-dual, very highly practical way of looking at this, which I'll explain in a moment. So I asked Olga when I was walking Howard the dog just before, and she immediately said, forgiveness, the best gift you can give yourself.
I can hear her saying that. That is absolutely her to a T.
Absolutely so.
Really?
Yeah.
Totally so. Yeah.
She's just so accessible. She's so generous with her time, you know.
It's her passion.
Yeah.
Passion. Yeah.
I just feel that, you know, she is complete evidence to me. Not that I ever needed any, I really didn't, but she is complete evidence that nobody dies, because whenever I ask her, she's right there. I mean, that was immediate, that title. There was no delay, no thinking about it. So why I've, you know, we've all agreed actually that we like that title so much is because that is going to be the whole nature of this conversation, because we're really, I just want to introduce it a bit more, and then I'll bring it over to Brian and THERESA. It's that if we think that forgiveness is forgiving a separate person, we either never get there, or we have to work so hard at it, because what gets in the way of every act of true forgiveness is self-justification, is the feeling, well, I'm justified in not forgiving this person because they did this awful thing. Now, you'll never get any further, because it's like a gate that's bolted as soon as you feel, you know. But what everyone doesn't realize then is that the other person, who you never even see anymore probably, doesn't even know whether you've forgiven them or not. The forgiveness is for you. You only live in your own world. We all live in separate realities created by our engagement with thoughts, not the thoughts themselves, but the engagement and the interest in the thoughts and carrying on thought conversations. So we're going to really explore this now. So whoever would like to begin, there's a really important, the best thing is always to do it with real life examples. And Theresa, you've got a story about your own life and how, you know, it's forgiveness has been the whole key to it and how you came to it. And we want this to be very spiritually practical just before I pass you over, because the aim of my doing these interviews with you is because I want people to see how practical spirituality is. It's not something in fairyland and then you've got the real awful world. It's how you can absolutely change this, your view of reality in your entire life, by getting the right spiritual truth about it that comes from within. So, in order to enlighten us about, you know, your experience, Theresa, would you like to start first? I don't know. How would you both like to do?
May I just say that while you were speaking just then, I was suddenly, the words came into my mind to say before Theresa starts, as a kind of intro, forgiveness is not an intellectual exercise.
No,
it is a soul exercise.
Totally.
It's
Yeah,
got to be from the heart. So over to you.
Beautiful.
Okay, where do we begin? I suppose the place to begin really is at the beginning, as they say, without going into huge amounts of gory detail, because that's really unnecessary. But my background was, you know, home life was basically not a healthy home life. There was a great deal of, on my, you know, for my experience, I can't speak for my older siblings, the others. I am the youngest of four, and in many, many ways, I was the unacceptable one. And from a very, very early age, I felt the complete rejection from mother, and her total disapproval of everything that I was, even from the fact that I was a girl and she wanted another boy. And that creates an emptiness in the soul of the child. Okay, one very brief example. When I was 3 and I was still the only one at home because I wasn't obviously old enough to go to school, I remember one day after lunch when mother sat in her cozy chair, I, you know, climbed up onto her lap and I put my arms around her neck and I gave her a big, what my children used to call a big smoochy kiss, a big lovely mummy smoochy kiss. And she peeled my arms from around her neck and she held me out and dropped me on the floor. And she said, "Don't you ever do that again. You are disgusting." Well, at that moment, it felt as though my whole being fell into, and I can still remember what it felt like. It doesn't affect me, but at the time, it felt as though I was dropping into a great black hole that was as big as the universe. And I felt completely and totally abandoned.
For a 3-year-old, that is just
it was hard. And there was never acceptance. Father, bless him, was a very, very angry man. I think there was a great deal of bitterness in himself as well, within himself, that he had not been able to accomplish the things that he had wanted in life. Maybe he felt cheated or what have you, I don't know, but there was a great deal of anger in him that came out in physical violence. And one didn't need to do anything to be on the receiving end of the physical violence. One day I walked into the sitting room, into a fist, several fists, and then the comment was, "I don't like the look of your face," and he walked out. So you never knew what you were going to encounter. So there was constant fear, because you might be joking and that would be taken the wrong way and you'd get a fist, or not aware that he was joking, so you reacted negatively, got a fist because you weren't going along with the joke. So it was a very...
He had a very warped sense of humour.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Very warped.
Bless his heart, he did. But so there was a great deal of physical violence, emotional,
Psychological.
Psychological, all sorts of things. Well, basically every violence. We don't need to go into details. I remember meeting up with a girl I'd known from school many years later, and she said, oh, you know, we used to laugh about you at school, have a good old chuckle, ha ha ha. Here comes old Theresa covered in bruises again. And I remember being completely and totally shocked, because I have absolutely no recollection of a single physical bruise. The emotional bruising was so much deeper.
Yeah.
That was what really, truly hurt. I had no, even to this day, I have no recollection of physical bruising. So this background, it goes deep into a child. It goes very, very deep into a child. I did not know that there was such a thing as self-worth. I didn't know it existed. So not consequently, I didn't have any. All these sorts of things. It made me very, very introspective, incredibly shy. I was the world's original dormouse, wasn't I?
Yeah.
Totally so. Terrified that if somebody asked me a question and I gave the wrong answer, what would they think? So if I would go completely silent. I couldn't physically speak because I was terrified of speaking, because then there would be further rejection. I would be unacceptable. This went on. We married. I was terrified that Brian would see the real me and run a mile. I didn't realize that he was seeing the real me, because my version was so warped. So when you grow up thinking that you are worthless, you are useless, you are plain, verging on ugly, that you are, everything about you is wrong, that is what you believe. And that's what I believed. So many years. And then coming up to more present times, some years ago, we used to have our offices, when we had our business, down in the docks where we live here. And there was another couple who had the offices across the corridor from us. And there was a communal kitchen that everybody used. And I was down there early one morning, first thing, getting everything ready to take back for the, to make the coffees and what have you in the office. The husband walked past, morning, Theresa, and I said, morning, and he went through the inner door. I heard that go. Then his wife came in, said, morning, Theresa, and I said, morning, and the inner door didn't open. But I remember noticing that she hadn't gone through the inner door. And I turned and she was standing in the doorway. She'd come back and she said, are you all right? And I said, yes, of course I am. I'm absolutely fine. She said, are you really? And I said, yes. And she said, really? And I said, no. I burst into tears. I had absolutely no idea why. And she said, would you like to go to a healing service? And I said, yes, please. And I didn't know what she meant. It was the following week. On that day, my older daughter drove me to work and took my car away so that I wouldn't have my own transport.
You mean drove you to the
No, excuse me. She drove me to work because we were leaving from work.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, we were leaving from work because the one who was taking us and I lived in different directions. So my daughter had control of my car, so I couldn't run away. I had to go. The three of us went out for a meal beforehand, and we went to this place, which I had never heard of. And this was a healing center where they work with Holy Spirit. I went in there and I was so resistant. I was so frightened. I felt a complete fool. I shouldn't be there. All the ego niggling at me. And their service on a Wednesday evening is open to the public. They have a half an hour of singing, that somebody speaks for half an hour, and then they have what they call the ministry time. And they have people there who are their counselors, ministers, who before the service, they will sit in a circle in quiet contemplation and listen for Holy Spirit. And they will receive words. It might be a Bible quote, it might be a picture, it might be actual words, but whatever they are, somebody writes them all down. And then after the talk and before the ministry time, those words are read out. And anyone who responds to those can go up whole ministry, and there's always two people working with one. So you've got two of the counselling team
counsellors to one
to one.
counsellee.
Yes. So by the time we had got to that stage, I don't recall what the woman was speaking about beforehand. I have no idea. Lovely lady, but the tears were absolutely pouring out of me. And either my daughter or Helen said, "Are you going up for prayer?" No, absolutely not. I'm not going up there. So when it was time, they stood up either side and they took an elbow each, and they and they physically walked me up to a couple, one of whom was the woman who had been giving the talk. And they asked me my name. I could not speak. The tears were absolutely flooding out of me. My daughter told them my name, and I couldn't say a word. I was breaking inside. So eventually they said, they just quietly prayed with me. And then they said, "I think you need to come in house and stay." And yes, please. Because this was also a residential place. So we went over afterwards and I paid my deposit, and I had to wait 6 weeks. But every week I was back there, terrified. I then went along for my week's in-house counselling, and the various things, and I had two beautiful counsellors, and it turned out it was that lady who was speaking and who was a guest at the time for counselling. They have an inner team who live there, and the warden's wife was my main counsellor. And we went through some of the issues of why I was there and the brokenness. And by the end of the week, I had made such progress, and I thought, that's it, everything is done, wonderful. And off we went, came down off that mountain into the world around me, and gradually the euphoria started to fade away, and I got on with life. We were running our business and what have you, and getting on with life. And then the following year, I was just sitting in quiet contemplation one day, and in my mind's eye, I saw a man's hand. And I knew that it was the hand of my father, because he had a very, very spatulate hand, very short, thick, stubby fingers. And it frightened me. So I mentioned it to Brian, and he said, "You need to get back down the road," as we called it, back down to the healing centre. So I booked in again, and I didn't know why I was there. I really did not know why I was there. And when you're it's time for your counselling session, your two counsellors beforehand take a few minutes to just spend that time with Holy Spirit before one of them comes and gets you, so that they're prepared. I was sitting in the drawing room. Everybody had been called to their appointment except me. And I'm thinking, I shouldn't be here. And again, my daughter had taken me and taken my car away. I'm stuck out in the middle of the countryside. There aren't even any buses. I wanted to run away and there was nowhere to run to. I was so frightened. And eventually, my one counsellor came and said, "I'm so sorry. We were in prayer and it just went on for so long, but we finally got you." And they took me to a different place that was actually within the home of the main counsellor. It was away from the main building because they were very busy. So it was the only room upstairs in their cottage, and it was always referred to as the upper room. Now, there was nobody else anywhere near us. That's important for me. We walked in and there was another lady sitting there whom I had never seen before, and I was a little bit sort of circumspect, a complete stranger, and I got to open up. And I was shaking so much. I was so frightened, and sat down, and this other lady said, "You don't have to be frightened. We know you were abused because Holy Spirit showed us." Well, that broke me completely, and I just collapsed, just absolutely sobbed. And after a while they said, "Right, can you go, where are you? What age, what circumstances?" And I knew I was 3, and I knew that this abuse had happened, but I wasn't taken through details. It was just enough for me to know, but it was enough to cause the most unspeakable pain within me. And I was collapsed completely across my knees. I could not sit up straight, just howling from the depths of my soul, which is a jolly good thing that we were a long way away from everybody else, because it gave me the freedom to just let go completely. And I was just vaguely aware of these 2 ladies quietly praying as I literally wept from the depths of my entire being. And then they said, all right, can you now go back there, but take Jesus with you? And I went back with him, and we didn't go into the house because at first I had seen myself standing outside the front gate and being terrified to go in the house. But this time he took me into a garden, and he put me on his knee, and I put my little 3-year-old arms around him as far as I could reach. And I was just leaning against him, and he was gently stroking my hair and just gently rocking me quietly on his lap. And the tears have been flowing. And I need to take a step back here. I apologize. As I was doing this incredible crying from, as I say, the depths of my soul, I heard one of the counselors, I don't know, ask Holy Spirit to wash me through. And as I took a breath for the next incredible sob, as I breathed in, the most unbelievable, I'm goosebumps, the most unbelievable peace just flooded my whole being. And I sat up. I could not believe the feeling that was flooding through me. And it was then that they asked me to go back. And then there was Jesus holding me. And then came the realization that 3-year-old me was sitting on a man's lap with my arms around him, his arms around me, and I was completely and totally safe. And it was the most exquisite feeling. And then we found that the dinner gong was going. We were so late, and I stood up, and there was a mirror on the wall. Now, I'm one of those unfortunate ladies that when you cry, the world knows for a week. Great big blotchy eyes, swelling faces. Oh, I stood up and I saw myself in the mirror, and I had been sobbing for I don't know how long, better part of 2 hours. There wasn't a mark on my face. My eyes were completely crystal clear. It was staggering. Towards the end of the week, I mean, we still had a lot of work to do. And towards the end of the week, at the very end, my main counselor asked me if I was ready to forgive my father. And that took me back a bit. And I thought, and in all honesty, I knew I had to be honest. It wasn't a glib question, and it did not deserve a glib answer. And I said, I don't know. I just don't know. And she said, would you like to? And there was a feeling in me, an uprush, a longing that I couldn't begin to put into words. And I just said, yes. There was just this need, not even a need, just a desire that was so incredibly strong. Yes, I knew that this was so vital. And attached within the grounds of the place, this healing center, there is a tiny, completely unadorned, ancient little church that is for the use of the people there. And she said, well, why don't we go over to the church, and you can make an offering of that desire to Jesus, to Holy Spirit, and we will figuratively leave it on the altar. And that's what we did. The 3 of us went over and knelt before that altar. And really what I was doing was leaving it on the altar of my heart, the desire to be able to forgive, to offer forgiveness, to ask forgiveness. And we left it there.
And be open to receive it.
And just left it there. And I didn't know what to do after that, but that was fine. The desire was there, the longing was there, the willingness was there. A couple of years later, I was talking with my counsellor one day, and we were talking about, not about that situation, but about Father. And I suddenly realized that as we were talking, I had no sense of fear. I had no sense of terror. And that we were able to talk completely naturally about it. And that's when I realized that the forgiveness had begun. Now, I made an offering of that desire for forgiveness to Holy Spirit. He had been working. In that 2-year span, of course, there is no such a thing of time in, the kingdom realms, but time for us, obviously, is what we are living in. But during that 2-year period, he had been working away in my heart. I don't know what he's done, and it's not my place to know what he's done.
You don't need to know.
No, I just know the consequences. And it shook me so much that I was stunned actually at first. I thought, wow. And of course, with that comes the most astonishing sense of freedom and release, which goes back to your first title. That's the forgiveness, the gift of forgiveness. And that with that came the releasing of my emotional ties to that time. It released me, it released Father, and the healing that comes from that forgiveness was beginning. It takes time. There was a lot of work. I went there for 10 years because there was a lot of work needed doing. But the forgiveness, and particularly that, because that was big, that one enabled more and more to come more easily. All the other different things.
It broke the logjam.
It really did break the logjam. And then everything else became much, much easier. It's like that layer of the onions. You go through, the outer layer tends to be the one that's the bitterest and the hard, it makes you cry most. And then you go through layer after layer. And that's one thing that's so beautiful about, Holy Spirit healing, is you don't go through the whole onion in one go. It's one layer at a time. And as you're ready, as I was ready for the next layer, then we'd go through the next bit and the next bit. And then eventually, when you go through it finally, right there in the middle, is that sweet little kernel right in the center of an onion. That I know that when I'm cooking, I like to try and sneak that bit for myself, because it's always the sweetest bit, right there in the center.
Now she tells me.
Right there in the center.
Never knew that about onions, honestly.
Oh yeah, right in the middle. They're just around that core a little bit. There's a lovely little sweet bit, and that's absolutely lovely. That's the loveliest bit. And that was again, when I went through it all, that was the gentlest, the easy thing to let go. And each layer is a releasing and a further releasing and a further releasing, and you go more and more into forgiveness. And as you say, it is the greatest gift that you can give yourself, because not only are you yourself healing, the other person is, whether they are aware of it or not, because Holy Spirit is not selective. Yeah. There is but one of us, and if one is healed, if one is forgiven, we are all healed, we are all forgiven. Whether we are conscious of it, our inner being knows.
I would like to now, because what Theresa has shared is amazing, and I had to fight back the tears. I was so moved, and I've lived through this all the way along. Theresa's dad was in Canada, so we didn't have contact with him after, not direct. He came here once.
That was a long time before.
Many years ago, and the relationship between us and him was broken. Very and broken. He completely disowned all of us.
Yeah, that's fine.
And he passed in 94, and the relationship between us had not been healed at the external world level.
No, not at all.
Although Theresa was healed and I was healed, because I had to fight against hating him for what he'd done to my beloved wife. And I knew that hate was a very damaging, destructive energy, and I didn't want that. So in '94 he passed, and we heard about it by telephone.
My sister called in.
And then Theresa and I, when we just received the news, we stood at the entrance to the kitchen.
It was a while later. 'Cause I was in
We,
Sussex.
we stood at, it was a few days later, we stood at the entrance to the kitchen in the hallway talking about him and that he'd gone.
Mm.
And as we were talking about him, I suddenly became aware that he was there in the kitchen, 3 or 4 paces away from us. And he had his back turned to us, which is body language for his rejection of us. But he had his head partially turned, earwigging on what we were saying about him. And when I became aware of him, I said to him spontaneously, "Peace be with you." Well, he spun round so fast, it was a blur, because he thought I was going to condemn him to hell because of all that he had done. And so when I said, "Peace be with you," he couldn't believe it. But because he was now in the etheric realm, he felt the energy, not the words, and he knew that I was being truthful, sending peace to him. Well, that started the rescue of Ted. That was her dad's name. And over a period of some months, or about 6 months, gradually, because Theresa and I are aware of the spirit world, we became aware of him, and in due season, he became accepting of us and our forgiveness of him, and we welcomed him back into our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now, the reason why I'm sharing this is because when people lay aside their body, that is not the end of the opportunity to forgive people. There is only continuity. There is no death. And Ted is alive in the etheric or spirit realms. He now has accepted Jesus into heart and soul totally. I could regale you with accounts of the amazing things for hours, but he is right there with us, and he's been instrumental with us in various healing and forgiveness endeavors from the spirit world, and with us here in embodied form.
And the only thing now between us is love.
Yeah.
And that is unconditional love.
I had some
Everything
resistance to that, but I knew that resisting was a mistake, and now all the resistance is gone. So this is a true forgiveness that is absolute healing for the heart, the mind, the soul, everything.
And the only thing left then is unconditional love. And that is so releasing and so healing. And it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I know from personal experience, forgiveness works. It does.
Yeah.
It's vital. It's absolutely vital.
It's liberating.
It is.
It frees us from the burden of unforgiveness. Is a terrible burden.
It is. And forgiveness of others, forgiveness of ourselves. And I had to let go of the desire to, the pity party syndrome. Oh, poor me. Look at me. I've been damaged. I've been abused. Oh, but pity parties are awfully boring after a while, because there are only ever 3 people there, me, myself, and I, and one can get very, very tired of that sort of company, and they really serve no purpose. So what is the point? And the only way to get rid of those pity parties, and so many of us have them for so long, is the forgiveness of ourselves. I mean, I had to let go of the victim consciousness
syndrome,
the victim syndrome, that we see ourselves as damaged. Well, really, we're not damaged, because in truth we are perfect, but we appear to have gone through this illusory thing in our life that has left us damaged, and people cling on to. I know a particular person who that is their identity. I am victim. This person sings that song constantly. Has
It's
been
their
through. It
identity.
is totally their identity. I did not wish it any longer to be my identity because it's so limiting, and you feel so uncomfortable. And I thought that there's got to be more to me than that. So we have to also forgive ourselves for believing the illusion, for participating in the illusion, if you like. And it's forgiveness of ourself can very often be the hardest thing to do. Very, very much. I say not often, it usually is the hardest thing to do.
But in reality, it's the only
Yeah,
forgiveness
of
that's
course.
needed, because we've projected our own lack of self-worth or self-loathing
Mhm.
out there
Yeah.
onto others around
Yes.
us.
Yeah.
And Jesus tells us in A Course in Miracles that we can only forgive ourselves through the process of forgiving our brothers in the sonship of God, because we've projected our unforgiveness of self onto them. So by forgiving them and the relationships restored, then the relationship with ourself comes back into freedom.
Yeah.
I actually think, yes, I know that in the Course of Miracles. My only feeling about that is that has to be the other way round. I think you have to be able to understand what you are at source, so that you can forgive yourself. Because then when you forgive yourself, I have found you automatically forgive everyone else. Because how do I forgive myself? Well, because I know that prior to thinking, prior to all the roles that I assume, prior to the conditioned identity that I've learnt, there's a basic knowing. You know, I call it the knower. It's pure intelligence. So if I stop thinking and just look, I know that there's something that knows I exist. It's my essential you-ness, my essential I-ness, my essence. And I noticed that not only is it perfectly intelligent, but it has an absolute absence of judgment, and that the absence of judgment is pure love. So I noticed that when I'm not engaged with my thinking and thoughts, I don't have that sense of anything, like I couldn't possibly be a victim or anything. So when I look back on all the so-called terrible things that I've done, I came to a place of forgiveness by realizing that I was just listening to my thoughts all the time. I believed the thoughts, I was engaged in them. And it wasn't until I came to a real sense of forgiveness, which also took me years, bit by bit, and to come to a place of real forgiveness inside, that then it's just automatic for me to I'd notice if I looked back on people that I thought hurt me, there wasn't any sting there anymore. I could remember the things that they did, but there wasn't the engagement. And so then, only when I found I could utterly forgive myself, without any effort, could I start to forgive other people. And I just want to just say one more thing before I hand it back, because I think it's really important what you said earlier. I know we mentioned it briefly at the end of the last interview, and I was saying to you that I read an amazing little thin book called How to Forgive When You Don't Know How. And the first thing it said is what you had said, is that choosing to forgive. And then, if mostly people choose to forgive because at some level they realize they are hurting only themselves when they're carrying this burden. It's exhausting. But the choice to forgive, it might take another 2 years before the feeling of genuine forgiveness matches up to the choice to forgive. And that's fine, because it will definitely happen because you've made that choice, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But in that 2 year period and it was a 2 year period for me, until that, I had been doing a lot of inner work. I had been growing, and I had reached the place where I was able to let go of the fear that I used to feel. I wasn't ready for that beforehand. Holy Spirit knew that. He knew I wasn't ready. And that's why I didn't experience that for a couple of years, because it's all done according to where we are and our needs, you know, that meeting us at our point of need with that wonderful spiritual healing. And that took me that period. It may have taken other people longer. It may have taken other people only a couple of weeks. But for me, it was a 2-year period, and that was perfect for me. And that, for me, shows the enormity of the love of Jesus and Holy Spirit and God and whatever anybody wants to call it. The enormity of that love is that they are healing us as and when we are able and we are ready. And that is just the most beautiful thing. I think it's amazing.
As an analogy, one could take the example of sowing a lettuce seed in the garden. Well, you don't, the seed of desire for forgiveness. So we sow the seed, but we don't return later the same day and expect to harvest the result of having sown the seed. It takes time, and the process takes time to unfold.
I'm sorry, that's making me chuckle, because you mentioned at the beginning how our beloved Olga Park, and her telling us many, many years ago how she had planted some seeds in the garden, and she was so impatient she would go and dig them up to see if they were growing.
And she was told from Spirit, don't dig up the seedlings. So that's an expression we use when people are, you know, hanging on to a thing. Don't dig up the seedlings, leave them to do their thing.
Exactly.
And that's how it works with Spirit.
Some they come up out of the soil much more quickly than others, and that's fine, because that's when they are ready. It's always when they're ready, when we're ready. So it goes on and becomes manifest.
And forgiveness is something that we can do in every moment, because it's really another word for surrender. Surrender is letting go, isn't it? Letting, if you're in a tug of war, just you can see that you're not getting anywhere, just to let it go, you know, and to and things, we're bombarded with things which appear outside, but you know, in our separate realities, that, you know, like when you're driving or anything, or you're in a queue in a shop, there's so many instances where you could get annoyed or impatient or anything, and so it's a moment by moment thing, and it's a beautiful practice, really, isn't it? You know,
and it sneaks up on us. The realization that, hey, I actually don't have any unforgiveness in me. It's all gone, and I didn't even see it happening. That's because it's happening as a within process rather than an intellectual or external process.
And it can, and you know, sometimes people don't realize that they're unforgiving, but I think how it can manifest when we're unconscious is it can manifest in behavior like, always, I remember, and I'm happy to say it's quite a lot of years ago, but I really remember it like yesterday, that I was just awful, because I used to, whatever my point of view was, I always had to get people to agree with me, and it was such hard work. I'd just work so hard. It was like I was pitching a product. I'd work so hard to get them to agree with how awful this thing was, or how awful that person was, or how, and I wouldn't get relief until they said, oh well, yes, I can see what you mean now, and then and it's a terrible thing. It's manipulative. It's based on fear, and I didn't know why I was so like that. It's in a state of survival. I almost had to get the other person to agree with me, otherwise I feel like I wouldn't survive, you know. And it was, and I think that's the kind of anger that can pop up, and you don't know, why am I angry? Why am I such an angry person? But it's all the way back to that, Teresa, isn't it? It's back to that lack of forgiveness that you haven't looked at all. So it's terribly important.
Very, 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 very much so.
Well, we had an experience that began about 15 years ago, which we'll talk about in a little while. but before that, and that brought about liberation from unforgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for everyone and everything. It was a forgiveness as a point of principle rather than individual. I forgive this person and I forgive that event, blah blah blah. And 3 or 4 years ago, I was mulling in my mind on one of my communing hill walks. I wonder if there's anyone in my in this incarnation that I have not yet forgiven. So I said to Jesus and Holy Spirit, is there anyone else that I'm supposed to be forgiving that I haven't yet turned to? And it was as if I heard them in stereo, the Jesus in one ear, Holy Spirit in the other, and in absolute union with laughter in their voice, they said, yourself. That was the only one that I hadn't really paid the appropriate attention to. Ah, right, thanks. Now I've got it.
Oh, oh, it's brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to, there's a couple of things that I'd like to ask you to do. So one is the experience of the young man that we, do you remember his name? McLean, was it?
Yes, yes, yeah. Okay, yes.
Yes, and and then I would like you to explain a bit about this amazing forgiveness, true forgiveness exercise, and perhaps we can sort of take people through it, or just share it a bit.
Yes.
But I think it would be really nice now to have another forgiveness story. So perhaps you could tell us about this young man, and I'm just going to.
This was something that was told when this particular man was visiting from the States with his wife, and he was I think, a Baptist minister. I think he was Baptist. He was certainly a minister, very much with a healing ministry within his church. And he was talking of a time, and I'm certain it was in the southern states. So I'm not going to be absolutely adamant that it was, but I'm going to say that I'm sure it was when they were in the southern states. And he was telling us about a couple who were his parishioners, and they had one child, an 11-year-old boy. And he went to school one day, and one of his classmates, another 11-year-old boy, came into class, and he had brought with him a gun that he had found at home, a revolver, or I don't know what guns are, but something you hold in your hand. And it wasn't a deliberate act, but in looking at it, the gun fired, and it killed the 11-year-old son of this man's parishioners. And the police obviously were brought in, and their attitude was, this was an adult crime, therefore the 11-year-old perpetrator would be prosecuted as an adult. And in that state, I believe there was death penalty, so it would mean going to juvenile prison and then onto adult prison, and ultimately onto death row, and he would be put to death, executed. After the initial shock and horror of what had happened to their son, the wife apparently said to her husband, I want to know why. Not just, oh God, why us? But why? What brought that child to the place where he brought a gun to school? What was behind it? And they decided to investigate. And it turned out that this child had been raised in appalling circumstances. There was a lot of, from what I can gather, drug issues within the home. He had been from a very early age prostituted out to male friends and relatives, and he had been abused in the most horrific way possible. And he was the most damaged child it was possible to come across emotionally. They discovered this, and they went to the police and they said, we will not have that boy prosecuted. Absolutely not. That boy does not need punishment. That boy needs love. And they went through all the procedures, and apparently, I gather it was very difficult, but they took that boy into their home.
Wow.
And they raised him as their child, and ultimately they adopted him. And they gave him the love that he was crying for from the depths of his being.
Oh.
And they said that they had two beautiful sons, their son in heaven and their son in their home. Now that, for me, is the ultimate example of true forgiveness.
Oh.
And that was, I am just goosepimples, and it still brings tears to my eyes and my throat.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, and one hopes that the boy who knows now what love is also learns to forgive himself. You know,
Yes,
I hope so. I'm sure, though, you know, because he's learned from the best, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. I understand he grew up to be a beautiful young man.
Oh,
But this was, to me, that was the most powerful example of forgiveness.
it is. I mean, your son. I mean, that's incredible.
Their only child. Yeah.
To adopt the boy who has murdered your own son and bring him up as your own and adopt him into your. This is where adoption really happens.
Yes.
It's here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And all this has to happen as well,
Yes,
but this is where it really comes from.
But then when you see this, you sort of step back. Of course, I mean, the emotional aspect of that is so profound. And then when we step back and look at it from a slightly different point of view of what went on between these two boys before they incarnated.
Yes.
What karmic condition was there? I am certain that they, with Jesus, with Holy Spirit, had planned that before they incarnated.
Yes.
They had a gift for each other, for the family, for the wider community. They both brought that gift. What appeared to be the most appalling tragedy was actually an amazingly beautiful gift of love.
Yes.
So that it touched my heart, it touched your heart, it's touched your heart, it's touched the heart of so many, many, many people and made people see things differently.
This is why it's so crucial, and that's why I thank Olga Part, your teacher, for this beautiful title, Forgiveness, the Greatest Gift You Can Give Yourself, because you really can't move on in happiness. You can't move on in relationships because you can be in a relationship and you can look at your new partner and think, oh, you know, they're looking at me in this way. Oh, it must mean something. And then you've got all your baggage from the past and you're accusing them of something they don't even know anything about.
Exactly.
And this happens so much. It's why so many people get split up. I mean, it's the main reason. They haven't forgiven something in themselves and in their world, and you know what apparently happened to them. It's so immense, and particularly at the moment when you know, in the state of the times that we're living in at the moment, there's so much, you know, anger, and everybody's got different ideas about what's really happening. But and then there's so much of lack of forgiveness and criticizing, and but the thing is
Judgment.
And judgment, and when we get beyond that to the feeling, beyond the thoughts, beyond the words, to the feeling, that yes, in a way maybe it is that the old society is breaking down and it needs to, you know, the old wheat, there might be some really good wheat as well, but the thing is, it's the force. In the tree of life, it's called the force of Mars, or Gabura, the branch that it comes down, it burns everything, even the good and the bad wheat, so that fresh new pastures that are nourishing, you know, feed the world, or feed the energy. And so it's a new energy that's happening. But this is the time more than ever that we need to find forgiveness. So I was wondering if you'd like to talk about this true forgiveness exercise, because it's on your website, Honest to Goodness, and I'll just to you to talk about.
Well, this was prompted by events about 15 or 16 years ago, when out of the blue, Theresa and I both were accused of all manner of things: lies, betrayal, wrong treatment of someone that we'd been very, very close to for a very, very long time. And this was absolutely out of the blue, a complete shock. And it was very, very painful at the time. But we had just started studying A Course in Miracles at that time, and we came to this whole, what was for us a new concept of true forgiveness, what Jesus calls forgiveness to heal, whereas the false forgiveness that this world goes through is he calls forgiveness to destroy. But so we had been studying about what he says about true forgiveness. And we'd also been reading a book by Gary Renard called The Disappearance of the Universe. And that book talks about true forgiveness. So we decided that we would ask Holy Spirit for help and guidance in cobbling together a true forgiveness exercise that we could practice using inspiration from Holy Spirit, from Gary Renard's book, and from A Course in Miracles. So we sat down and produced this exercise, which is just a few, three or four paragraphs. It's not a very long process. And we started practicing, excuse me, we started practicing this with the person that had made all these extraordinary accusations against us.
Not specifically with them sitting in the room, definitely not.
No.
But
no, this is what we call heart mind to heart mind. The person isn't present physically. It doesn't matter where they are. They can be on another continent.
So we've just got a helicopter going off overhead, so I don't know whether that's interfering with things. Don't know. It's gone.
It's gone now.
Fine, it's fine. It's nice and clear, don't worry.
So we started practicing this exercise that we had put together under inspiration every morning and every evening. And this went on for quite some weeks.
Months.
And we didn't appear to be aware of any events happening or any changes taking place.
And if I may say, we were doing this separately from each other. We didn't sit down together and do it. It was, our own individual heart mind to heart mind, rather than a corporate one, as it were.
Yes. So after several months, I had a mystical experience in which I had a direct connection back from this person. We'll call this person CS. And they responded, even though there'd been no contact at the horizontal level, no, the external level. So that was greatly encouraging. So we carried on. And after another few weeks, we had a second mystical encounter with this person, CS. And that gave us even more encouragement. So we carried on. And another few weeks later, I had an experience in which I'm a farmer's son. And 400 years ago, I was in an incarnation with Theresa as my wife, Esther, in which I was a farmer. So farming, my dad was a farmer, so farming is very much part of my background, in my blood. So I was in a hay barn. Now a hay barn is wide with two high doors on each side, one side and one the other, so that the horse or tractor can draw the wagon full of hay into the barn, and there it can be unloaded either side. And there is, what, for want of a better term, a mezzanine floor about 10 feet off the ground, so that the hay can be put onto the upper floor and then down below. And I was standing on the upper floor, right at the edge, looking down where the horse and cart would be. It was empty, except this person, CS, was standing on the floor immediately below me. And as I looked, she started to float up towards me from the ground. And as she started to move upwards, her physical form started to disintegrate and turn to dust, which just settled down onto the floor. But she was rising up and emerging from within her physical form. And by the time she got to head height with me, on the same level with me, her physical form had disintegrated, and emerging from it was a daylily in tight bud form. And by the time it had got to, say, waist level with me, her head, and by the time she became level with my head, my eyes, the daylily had opened up before my eyes, and it was the size of a dinner plate, and it was sunlight, golden yellow, living light. And so I knew that this was a sign from Spirit saying, your true forgiveness exercise, both Theresa and me, had produced this result where all the anger and the judgment and all the other dark stuff had gone from this person, and they were rising up and emerging into the light of day. And I discovered several years later that a daylily is a symbol of filial devotion. In other words, the devotion of a child for a parent. So we decided that this had worked, but Jesus had always said to me, if in doubt, do nothing. So we were not entirely certain that this was the actual result. So we carried on with the true forgiveness exercise for about another fortnight. And then I said to the Holy Spirit, there doesn't seem much point in carrying on with this, because we feel as if the forgiveness, we've got the feeling that we're liberated from the unforgiveness that we were holding toward this person. And the Holy Spirit immediately replied saying, the process is complete. So we said, okay, we don't need to carry on with the exercise, because now we're forgiven. We've undergone the true forgiveness process. And then, to our utter astonishment and joy, we realized it gradually emerged into our conscious awareness that we hadn't just forgiven CS, we had forgiven the entire sonship without sending any thoughts to any individuals other than this one person. And so the ego would say, how can you forgive the whole world when you don't know everyone? And how can you forgive what hasn't yet happened? But it's not forgiving individual events or people. It's true forgiveness is about being a point of principle, so that whatever comes along with an individual person or group of people or situations or events, we have forgiven them as a point of principle. So you might say, okay, I forgive you, now what's the issue? And it doesn't make any difference what the issue is, because it can't affect you. Now, intellectually, that's impossible, but this is where forgiveness really happens. And the heart is the seat of our true self, where Jesus and the Holy Spirit and our higher Christ self have their dwelling place within each of us individually. And it's from the heart that this happens. So it doesn't matter what happens, because it's all external world stuff, and that's all an illusion. The reality is that we're all one
Exactly.
in the heart of God.
And if we forgive one, if that one is ourselves, it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. If we forgive one, we have forgiven the entire sonship, because there is only one.
And also, you know, in doing that, like you say, you've become a person that naturally forgives. So anything that comes
Yes.
along, you're already well skilled in and
Yes.
practiced in it. So it never needs to affect you again, no matter what it is. And you never know what's going to happen. I had a client once come to me, and all his problems, all his physical ills, his mental ills, you know, it took a few weeks for me to get it out of him, but it stemmed from a business relationship that he'd had with another man, and where, you know, the other guy done the dirty on him, and you know, and caused him
Yeah.
and all that sort of
Been
thing.
there.
So yes, so years and years and years, this man, I mean, he drank a lot, and his liver was in a, oh gosh, he was in a right old state, and he was a lovely man, but he couldn't let it go. So, you know, when I was sort of saying, but you know, but would you like to, just for your sake, never mind him, would you just like to be free of that burden? Because the thing is, when you don't forgive someone, if you forget for a minute that you've forgiven them, you feel so justified that you shouldn't. You feel you must keep on not forgiving them. You've got to prop it up almost. And he said it was so effortful. He said yes. He can't forgive him, but yeah, he went, well, I suppose I would like to, just for my sake, just for, I said, that's right, just for your sake, forget about him.
One
And
step at a time, laddie.
that's it. But in the time that I knew him, he had a real breakthrough. And then one day he was drinking in the pub, and this very smart looking guy came across, and he instantly recognized who it was. And it was this guy, you know, the guy that had done the dirty on him. And he said, oh, he said, you know, Mike, I'm so glad to see you. It's taken me months to track you down, because you know, and I've then when I did track you down, I've been so scared to approach you, but I just, before I even sit down, because I realise you might not even want to talk to me, I just want to say to you that I can never be sorry enough. And never has a day gone by when I've not thought of that. But just in the last few weeks, he said, I felt I have to get my courage together and come and see you and say, I am so sorry. The upshot was that, of course, when somebody's sorry to you, you can somehow forgive them anything when you know they're genuinely sorry. And he felt it from the other guy. And they ended up being in business together again, but really healthy, good business. They ended up,
Yeah.
and they're the best of friends. I mean, it was amazing. And this person that had been coming to me, he said, I can't believe that. I mean, he wouldn't know that I'd forgiven him. I said, yes, but it's all just one presence. It's underneath all these thoughts that keep you separate. It's just one mind. You can't forgive somebody and they not know on some level. It might not always work out like that. You may never hear from that person, but that could be,
Exactly.
they could be too ashamed to ever approach you. They may not have the courage to say sorry. You don't know, and you don't need to know. It's just
No,
you. Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It absolutely does not matter.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean,
I
we
mean,
know the
sorry.
situation that Brian was just describing.
Mm.
We know that it is resolved. In the outer, it has that resolution has not manifested in the outer.
Doesn't
There
matter.
is no contact between us and this other person, and that's absolutely fine. If it never occurs whilst we are still incarnate, it doesn't matter at all, because ultimately all is forgiven, all is released, all is perfect.
In
And it's resolved
eternity.
in you. Yes,
And that's the only reality.
Exactly.
that's
Exactly
right.
so.
The moment it's resolved in you, it's resolved, isn't it?
Yes.
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
I use the analogy of a tug of war,
Exactly.
where you've got two parties at the end, either end of a rope, pulling, trying to pull the other person into your camp of self-righteousness, whatever. And so when we've decided, and the tug of war is about unforgiveness.
Yes.
And so when we finally say, why am I doing this? I don't need to do this anymore. And we let go the rope. The tug of war is over.
Yeah.
It only
Very
takes
good.
one person, one party to let go their end of the rope, and it is over.
That's
It
right.
doesn't matter what the other person is doing. That's the Holy Spirit's concern, not ours.
They can pick
We,
up the rope and wrap themselves completely in it and say, look at me, I'm hurt, I'm justified. That's fine. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. But it's over.
That's right.
It's over.
And the fact that this is, so important, that whatever you believe, just try it. You can ask the Holy Spirit, you can call it your higher consciousness, you can call it God. You're not alone. You can ask for this help, just like I asked for the title today. Just ask.
Yes, exactly so. Exactly so. Yeah.
This forgiveness exercise, do you think it's a bit too long to do on here, or would you like to say anything about it, or what you...
well, let me first say that
Mm.
because we know lots of people around the world, we've had people say to us, I've got this unforgiveness issue. So we've said, try this true forgiveness exercise because it did amazing things for us. It brought complete healing of our unforgiveness, not just for the party that we felt aggrieved toward, but to everyone and everything. So they've tried it, individuals, some here in the UK, some in various other parts of the planet. And we've had such positive feedback from so many people that's when I put it on my website, the Honest to Goodness website. And I have no idea how many people have read it, but I've recommended it to people, and they've got free access to it, so they can practice it. What perhaps we could get Jay to do when he's preparing this discussion for uploading onto YouTube is have the text of it under the video so that people can read it, and they can even copy it, paste it, download it, print it out, have it available to them free of charge. There's no charge. Jesus has said to me countless times, freely have you received, freely give. So
But
there's
very, very basically, I mean, very, very quickly, basically what we're saying is that we say, right, the person, whoever it is, you're basically saying, and this is an actual, this is a conscious, from the heart, from the depth of the soul thing, that I forgive you for what in truth you have never really done, and I ask you to forgive me for what in truth I have never really done. And then we go through the thing, and then it's and so all is released, and we are released into innocence. There's more to that, but that's very, very basically it. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's a very basic thing, and you've done that.
I'm
I
just
can't see.
no, that hasn't interfered.
Okay.
I'm just bringing up the true forgiveness exercise on the website, and so I could read this out now. There's explanatory notes with it. I won't read those, but the exercise without the explanatory notes says as follows: Dear blank, I choose gladly to forgive you for all the things that in truth you have never really done, that I may freely receive the forgiveness that is rightfully mine. And I ask your forgiveness of me for all the things that in truth I also have never done, that you may freely receive the forgiveness that is rightfully yours. I give you this gift of forgiveness via the Holy Spirit, so that by his wisdom and timing, he may place it in you and keep it safe within your mind and bring it to your awareness when he sees that you are ready and able to receive it, and that I also may receive it. And now we are released into innocence and join with the Holy Spirit in peace and joyous oneness with our beloved brother Jesus in Papa, that's God. I bless you, I bless you, I bless you, for restoration to fullness of your remembrance of who you really are. You are Christ, pure and innocent. Papa's Son is guiltless, and sin does not exist. Now are we forgiven and free to see only the face of Christ in each other. And that's what it is.
That is so beautiful. It just is so beautiful. But one thing I'm going to say, because you know, when anybody watching this, it depends how people are, what place they're in, and how distressed they are when they see this. So they could have listened to the whole of this interview, but then heard that line, I forgive you for something you've never done and I've never, and they'll stop. So can you just say in a few words, what do you mean by nobody's ever really done anything?
Well, that's because time and place, this external world around us with trees and houses and people, is time and place. And we've either got eternity as reality or time and place. They can't both be real because they contradict each other. So if we take Jesus's counsel saying that time and place is a dream, it's like a dream when we're in bed at night and we're dreaming of bodies and people and things going on. And then we wake up in the morning and we realize that that was only a dream. Well, this external world where we appear to be Brian and Theresa and you're Amanda, and we're all having these relationships and these things are happening, that is like a much more extensive dream. And Einstein is reputed to have said, this world is only a dream, a very realistic seeming dream, but a dream nevertheless. So we'll never experience that as having any prospect of being true while we're examining these words with our intellect. This has got to be something that we allow a sense of resonance to arise from within our heart mind.
Yes.
Which the heart mind doesn't judge. The head mind judges and calculates and criticizes and all that stuff. But the heart mind doesn't do any of that at all. So when we say, okay, I've got some unforgiveness issues, I really want to deal with this and be liberated from it, how do I do this? We've got to go from here to here and focus on here, because then that's where love comes from. And love completely dispels unforgiveness and judgment and grievance and all that business. And so we're then focusing the attention of our consciousness on our heart mind and saying, okay, I want to engage with heart mind and let that have primacy in my consciousness,
Awareness,
my
yeah.
thoughts, so that I can actually look at this person that I've got this grievance against with a new perception, with new eyes, the eyes of love, instead of the eyes of grievance and judgment and the circle that keeps going round and getting us nowhere. And this is where it comes from. And when we can say that true forgiveness exercise that we've just shared, from here, then we're on the right track. And it will produce the result. If it doesn't happen within a day or a fortnight or a month or even a year, so what? Do we want the exercise to work? Are we willing to be patient? Because if we're impatient, it won't work. We've got to be willing to say to the Holy Spirit, I'm doing this with you, and let it outwork and proceed according to your timing, not my impatient timing. And I can speak about impatience quite a lot because I was there.
I brought him a wonderful gift to learn what patience is. I've taught him well.
My tutor.
I have.
Oh, I think that's absolutely amazing. And I mean, another reason why, I mean, everybody believes that they are doing the best. Now, even if the best is for themselves.
Yeah.
So let's take the man who undercut the other person and stole his business away. He felt that he didn't have enough consciousness to think beyond unselfishness, because when people are unconscious, they can't help that. They are in survival mode. So that there's only two modes. You're either conscious or you're in survival mode. So if you're in survival mode, there's a lot of fear. This makes what we call the word selfish, because it makes me think, well, I've got to look after number one and make sure that I'm all right, me and mine, because I'm in survival mode, not knowing that I'm in survival mode. And therefore that makes me act in this certain way.
Yeah.
So, but the other person who's got more consciousness and who feels, well, I would never do that, you know, the self-righteous bit, well, I would never do that. How could they? You know, that comes because that person isn't in survival mode. They're one up from that. They're more conscious. So, of course, the one that's conscious will never in a million years understand the unconscious. You might say, well, I'm in Australia, but I'm looking for you in France. You'll never find the answer.
Exactly. Exactly so.
Yeah, so that's why we can forgive everybody when we recognize that people are just in levels of consciousness. But as soon as we feel all self-righteous, I'd never do that, then we're coming down to their same level, because
Yeah.
we're being very selfish. It's all about me, you know.
And
So
we're
it's
here
so
to
interesting.
we're here to share Jesus's words, who's saying to us all the time, "Come up higher."
Exactly.
And so our message to the world is, come up higher. Join Jesus and us, and we'll all be together at the summit, at the top of the mountain,
The view is lovely.
More
top of the hill of
lovely.
the
Yes.
Lord.
But
Yeah.
when we also think that whenever somebody appears to be doing something to us that is unkind, they actually are doing that unkindness to themselves
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
projecting it out, because they are coming from a place of brokenness within.
That's that
And
survival
when we
mode.
realize that all of these negative things that are coming towards us are coming from a person's place of brokenness, then that engenders compassion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jesus says in the Course that you're either calling for love or you're giving love. And anything that is coming from a place of brokenness is a call for love. Well, how do we respond to a call for love? Do we say, oh, you're not worthy of it? No, we want to offer love. We want to extend love.
That's the only
And
meaningful
that,
response.
exactly. And forgiveness is love. It is true love, unconditional love. It's not forgiving, saying, okay, yes, I will forgive you, but boy, don't you ever do that again. That is not unconditional forgiveness. So this is where unconditional forgiveness is recognizing that actually they have never done anything to us. They're doing it to themselves.
Oh,
And
completely.
it's their pain, it's their grief, it's their torment. So in that case, in that way, we see that they've never really done it to ourselves. We've to us. We've never done it to another person. We've actually just done it to ourselves. This is why we forgive ourselves as well.
So what
Because
happens if the person who's hurting inside projects grievance and anger at the other person who was their friend, because they're feeling so much pain, they've got to get rid of it. And that person then says, oh, well, if that's the way you feel, I don't want any more to do with you. Well, then this person has lost a friend. So he has been the loser of what has happened. And the other person's gone off and made other friends. So we're only doing it to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Only loss with unforgiveness.
Yes.
Never gain.
Aw. Well, I just think it's been amazing. I mean, it's just so easy to be with you, and I just absolutely love it. And
Likewise.
oh, thank you. It's a massive subject, and we just can just know that Christ consciousness, that Jesus, whatever what anybody wants to call pure love, will send this around the world, because nobody should ever feel, oh yes, I got that one. I don't ever need to forgive anybody, because forgiveness is in every moment. And then this amazing exercise, I love that forgiveness exercise. You know, like I said earlier, you get practiced at that, and then suddenly the thought of not forgiving becomes like water off a duck's back. You are instantly a forgiving soul. So just mention your website address again. So it's
Okay. It's www.honest and then the number 2
yeah.
goodness.org.uk.
So honest number 2 goodness.org.uk. Yeah, yes, great, that's fantastic. But we'll put it under the thing. I just want to say thank you very much. I love you very much, and I know everybody will.
Thank you, darling. Bless you.
We love you.
We love you.
Bye
Joy.
for now.
Thank you, Joy, sweetie.
Oh, I'm glad. Oh, bye for now.
Bye, darling.
Bye.
Bye bye.